Hello, today is June 4th, 2019. This is the conformance subproject of SIG architecture. I am going to try and sort through my tabs here, get a window to share. Hopefully folks have had a good KubeCon EU and ready to get rolling here. Share my screen. All right. Follow up on action items. I don't know if anyone's brain is fully context swapped post KubeCon EU. Does anyone have like a list of action items to follow up on?
I think some of it's just the recovery. Did we start the meeting as far as the recording and everything?
Yes, that was the intro portion. The recording should be started.
So, I guess I can give a little update. So, started looking at some tooling for creating the behaviors we're talking about from the API schema as it exists today, as opposed to annotating it additionally, which we could potentially do too. But for now, just chewing through the schema, basically looking at each field in any given spec object, more or less, and putting out generating a list of the sort of behaviors. I think what we could sort of do is say that there's a behavior of how a given, say, spec should behave, how the system should behave when a resource is created with the default, and then we have to, describe how the system is going to behave as we alter each mutable field away from the default. A lot of that can be generated by tooling to the point of test skeletons and everything like that. So I was kind of playing with that. I put some little hacky tooling together as a sort of proof of concept, and then I'll update the KEP that I have to describe that tooling and how that process might work, and we can discuss it on GitHub when I get that uploaded.
Okay, that'd be good. Any questions? I mean, this is pretty much a follow-on from what we originally talked about. You also said you were going to update the KEP with more context and detail too, as well. That would include this.
That would include, yeah. That'll all come together. Okay.
There's a section here that says KubeCon discussion follow-up. I think I missed the conformance session. Is there particular topics that folks wanted to discuss here?
Well, the thing that I brought up there was what I just talked about. I think that looking a little broader, there's a few different avenues we can take to kind of go through test development. And but again, I think that that's something unless there's questions or comments about it here, that was recorded in KubeCon. I don't know if anybody watched it. And I'd be happy to discuss it more here. I think Hippie had some things he wanted to discuss, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull up the links really quick, but we had some questions that we came up with, and I wanted to just get some discussion around it. It wasn't really a good forum for discussion in presentation mode. It was more like a deep dive, but I wanted to kind of bring those up, and I'm trying to pull the links up now. But so I'll just kind of do API Snoop questions, and then the first one. Wow, that's really big. I'll do it and then change the font size there, and I think we had this must be an old version of the presentation, but I had some links, and then do this next one. I'll go ahead and paste these if someone else wouldn't mind fixing the amazing font size, then that'll help me to. And I think these are the core questions that we tried to answer in that presentation. unfortunately, I have an old copy. Let me see if I can find the actual presentation itself. These are the slides. Not owned by me, but owned by anyone. And KubeCon EU conformance. I think this is the one from May 24. So we got a link to the slides. So for our KubeCon follow-up, here are the slides. And then that will allow me to jump down to my section. Past HIPYAC or API Snoop. And then here's the actual link. And change. I don't know if it's easier to. Yeah, sorry, I'm not really good at editing the text on here. See if this pastes. So this link here is the looking for the EDE test, so which stable APIs are not being tested. And then we also have the stable core APIs, which are not conformant, which is this one. And then we have that last one, which is what's being hit by, what's untested things being hit by core. And we also had some conversation on Slack around what beta and alpha things are being hit. And if on that first one, we have 95. If I were to just to kind of summarize on the first one, we have 95 endpoints are being hit but not tested. I wonder if there's a way to link to the slides, but.
Can you explain again how you identify when something is being hit but not tested? By hit, you mean hit by the Helm charts and not tested by the conformance? Is that what you mean? Or something else?
Yeah. So if I'm gonna, on my screen, I'm gonna click on that first link and kind of walk through that explanation real quick.
I can't access.
That what is that? That's the Google Doc.
Is that account part of, a member of the communities-dev Google group? Because if that was my slide deck, I think I should have access. But
I'm a member of like all the things, whether.
Okay, maybe it wasn't. Let me check that right now.
I'm thinking that's the document that we were working on, and that would definitely help to show the slides. But as far as answering the question, John, what we're doing on that first one is we're limiting the user agents to just what's displayed from EDE test. So it's actually what is being hit by the EDE test binary, and we're not going to show. We're going to zoom into just the stable stuff.
Right, but I guess how do you know whether it's being tested? That's the so it's being hit by.
You should have access now.
When do we? How is tested defined? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Yeah. So tested currently is defined by if the API endpoint is hit by the EDE test binary. We're on slide 27.
Okay, so then
we can redefine that. I mean, that's kind of the. Why don't you dive into this enough to get a shared.
I was specifically asking about with these numbers, like because you said we hit these. They're not hit by tests. Oh, they're hit by the EDE test, but not by the conformance test. Got it. Okay. Okay.
Instead of the first one is just not getting tested at all. Where we're hitting all of these endpoints, and they're not tested. And if you actually click on the link, it gives us a list of those endpoints, so we know which 95 endpoints we're talking about. And if you want to change your perspective or view on that, you can go around. But this is stuff that is tested, but not conformance tested. So
why do we open issues for sections of the API where it's not a specific, it's more of a higher level feature. Why don't we just open up issues, or at least an umbrella issue for this one, and then write down the list for the higher level features. We don't need to go to the details of the 95 specific endpoints because they're all.
Sure. You did tend to get grouped together.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean the API kinds are all there, so right.
Yeah.
A lot of them are. You could group that
We
way.
thought about grouping by kind or having a limit by kind or other type of things so we can focus on those specifics.
Yes.
But what that seems to be the action out of this list is taking the endpoints and creating a super ticket around stable endpoints being hit during our release job that aren't being tested at all.
That seems fair to open an issue. Like, I think the question I have is, this data is good and actionable, and we could like direct people towards it today. But in order to do that, we need the issues created.
All right, I'm going to put under action item, actionable, but needs issues created. And then the other two big questions were about stable core. They're tested but not conformant. So stable core endpoints that have tests that we could tag. And then the last one was which untested things are being hit by core components. So this is untested stuff hit by specifically, so what are we looking at now? This is so this is anything with cube star in the list. So if you go back to the API Snoop page and go to the very top, just so it's really clear what we're looking at, on the left-hand side, it shows you the list. So see all matches, undo the little angle thing there on the gray bar on the left. Go down to the little, down a little farther. Underneath the pattern match, down. There you go, and up to the see all matches, just, it's a tree. And those are the components that we're looking at right now, filtered down to that. So these main components are hitting these 125 endpoints that are completely untested by the definition we have now.
My same comment still applies. These are both actionable. We should open up an issue with regards to basically the kind, and then point with the details over to here. We can prioritize. We can prioritize them maybe for like the next session planning. So I think one of the things that we should do probably for this cycle is take a look at our backlog, because we're kind of locked out of 115 now. 115, we're not going to be able to get anything else in at this point.
Yep.
So we should probably get all the details sorted for what we want to do for 116, and we need an issue backlog that includes these updated details.
Yeah, we can go through and do some planning and put some things in the 116 milestone and just try and like get through that list.
Yep. What was the third thing? There was three of them. That was the second one.
The first one was the core but not tested, and then the other one was stable core tested but not conformant, so stuff we could upgrade. And the last one was core things that are completely untested. So those are the three areas. So this middle one, tested but not conformant, are candidates for promotion, which might be tickets.
And we already have like a number of issues on those particular ones.
Okay.
So those ones we should probably actually have one umbrella issue, and then put them together so we can start to execute cleanly.
All right, we have an umbrella issue will get created there.
Yeah. So there's three different umbrella issues. Perhaps like next week we can even like have a perhaps next week we can even have a separate mini planning session if we have these other issues in place. at least to enumerate priority. Next 2 weeks from now, I think we're bi-weekly.
Yeah.
Are there any questions about this? I think just having an enumerated list alone is helpful. We can give help wanted notifications to the broader group. And we can even send an email about it, like saying this is what we see currently, and we can prioritize a subsection of them, and then kind of federate that work out.
So basically, the action items will consist of a bunch of promotion requests, basically.
The action item will be umbrella issues that will basically point to PRs that people can point to action items where people can create PRs for the specific items in the bulleted umbrella issues.
Yeah, and I think we should try and get as many things lined up, because getting these promoted early in the cycle, once we get there, will be the best option.
Yep. Yeah, having a list, having a concrete set of list items that have priority that we help to assign, I think is super important to help to promote transparency and be able to federate the work more broadly. Because most of these things aren't really that hard, especially the internal promotion stuff. Any other questions, comments? Do you have a link to the? Do you have a link to the actual presentation that you can paste?
That's the slides on the next. The video.
The video. Yeah.
Yeah. Just one moment. So I think that it worked.
I can add the video link later.
Okay. Next up, unless there are other comments, Claudio, test images.
Yeah. So basically, a couple of months ago, we talked about that we're having too many images being used by Kubernetes and E2E tests. And we talked about maybe centralizing some of them. And that effort is being tracked by that issue right there that you've opened up.
Mm-hmm.
So one proposal was that we could centralize most of the images into the agnost image. And basically I have a couple of pull requests which does just that. You can see them right here. Basically at this moment there are centralized like something like 12 or 13 images, and the total image size is something like 40 megabytes. And considering the fact that the webhook image itself is at least 30 megabytes, I think it's pretty decent having so many images being of that size. Mm-hmm. In regards of testing the changes, as far as conformance goes, it passed for me. All the tests I've run using the new image in conformance, it seemed to be fine. But of course, some of those images are being used by literally thousands of tests. For example, the six storage tests, which is basically a matricial set of tests. I couldn't test all of them. It's basically impossible for me. But I really hope that we have enough CIs to cover everything. And for the most And it seems that the first part, at least, looks mergeable. And right now, a couple of people have been tagged to also review the pull requests.
So just for edification, if you want me to look at anything, I will never see it unless you /assign Timothy SC. I've declared bankruptcy. I have notification. So if you want me to take a look at it or get my attention, I won't necessarily respond immediately, but I always, it's part of my regular workflow to take a walkthrough. So that at least will guarantee you that I will touch it and try to route people. At this point of 115, we can't do anything. So it's going to have to wait till 116. But in the meantime, that doesn't mean that we can't potentially get some of the images into Google registries. And I'll have to poke possibly DIMS and some other people to make that go, because that's still under control, at least that I'm aware of, unless folks know otherwise.
Yeah, well, what will have to be done after the first part merges is that the agnostic image will have to be rebuilt and pushed. So basically, we can have the CI run over the first part of the centralization. So we know that that's going to be fine. And if there are any issues which arise, we'll fix them before we actually replace all of the images.
Okay. I think for the time being, I can if you assign me on those issues, and the project automation should be in place. I don't see Srini here, but the default ability to add to the project board should be updated.
When did that go into effect? Because I don't think it was the other day, but.
If it's not, I know that he had PRs in flight to get that in place.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, because it's not on the board and I'm not assigned, so it's invisible to my radar right now.
Okay. I'll assign you.
And let me poke. I'll poke Srini offline to see if the project automation is done. Is your other Windows support one also related or unrelated?
Still something that we discussed some time ago.
Yeah.
Basically, the first part has received quite a lot of reviews, and it's probably looking fine. I got at one point an LGTM. The first part is the one that it's a little bit bigger and does a lot of the logic that's required. Mm-hmm. And the other parts, they're more straightforward. I think the other thing that would remain is that the image build process that is currently being used by, I don't know what systems we have at the moment, should include a Windows node as well. So they can be built and published under the GCR registry, GCRIO registry.
I saw that you already have DIMS looped in on that issue. He'd be the one that would be helpful to get that rolling through.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Those are basically updates.
Okay. Are there any other topics that folks want to discuss today? We could go through the project board, but what I was thinking is to get updated issues and to take a quick pass stroll offline asynchronously, and multiple folks, we could do that via Slack and try to prep for like an actual planning session in the next meeting seems like more appropriate because my context is totally swapped out. I don't know if other people are up to date, but I'm still suffering from a post-KubeCon trying to swap pages back in because I was out too as well.
You know, I think that makes sense. I think that there are several issues that, you know, now that you know the pool is closed, I think there's, you know, they're going to stall a little bit. I think there's some sort of some work that can be done to retarget the milestone, retarget things to milestone 116. Little administrative things that need to be done, and you know, I think then, as I recall, and maybe this is what we need to go through and check, there were a number of issues still pending updates, waiting for the PRs to be updated with some tweaks. Claudia, do you know, are there any prerequisite PRs that didn't make it in? So we had a bunch of PRs that, promotion PRs that were waiting on other changes to get in, reorganizing some things. Did all of those get in, or are we still locked right now?
No, basically a lot of those promotions are waiting for the pull requests I've posted. For example, the centralization, for example, that should also that issue should also include some extra utilities for Windows that how to say it. Basically, the purpose of the diagnosed image is to be able to run certain things independent of the platform. And one of the things that some tests do is netstat, for example, which basically has a different behavior on Windows and a different behavior on Linux. And that should be treated in diagnosed in some way. And I haven't started on that yet, since I've been busy pulling in all the images.
Okay, all right. So then, yeah, that'll be, I guess, part of the planning session next time.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Are there any other topics that folks want to discuss? Or we can adjourn.
John and I
Oh, go ahead.
John and I had some time to talk about the capturing of behaviors and trying to create this definitive list, and how do we capture that in such a way that it's easy to create testing around it so that it's well defined. And we were trying to, without analyzing, you know, traffic, how do we use our existing documentation? Because that defines what people can do with Kubernetes. And he sent me a couple examples of going through how DNS works, because he's connected with core DNS, but it's going through the public-facing documentation and writing kind of a walkthrough that is an update to the documentation, but also runs the commands that bring up what's expected inside the documentation, and having that being captured with the audit logs so that we can, in a concise form, define a behavior based on walking through our own documentation, because that would allow us to scale out. If we can find a way to have people contribute to ensuring the documentation does what it says, that would also allow that documentation section to actually describe a behavior that would say, here is how this documentation interfaces with the API server, and allow us to have very informed test writing information for how this behavior affects a cluster. And we went through pretty far, but we didn't concisely wrap it up, where we have the documentation exported the markdown that included the output of the different commands and the audit log. And at that point, kind of handing it off to, now how do you analyze those audit logs to either give us some actionable, how we write some tests, or hopefully at some point automating our, analyzing all of those behaviors to get some useful. I don't know. That's kind of where I stopped, but I wanted to get some feedback on what interesting ways can we go and define these behaviors where we can distribute and include more people, and helping to easily define them by not writing Go code, and just following the documentation. So it does two things: improve our documentation to make sure people can walk through it, and in doing so, generating data for us to have data-driven conformance metrics.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think that the executable documentation thing is an interesting idea. I think that my concern about it with respect to the conformance test, and I think we talked about this at KubeCon, is at least part of the goal of what the CAP I'm working on, I was trying to do is create a system, a single document of record that defines the list of behaviors. And I'm not sure how this would integrate with that, as far as if it's in the documentation, that's a sort of set of complex behaviors on top of the basic behaviors usually. And so how do we, I don't want what I'm saying is I don't want the documentation to necessarily be the system of record or the document of record of what the behavior should be. And so how do we make sure that, how do we use that to inform the record, but not necessarily be the record? You understand?
You're on mute.
Yeah, you're on mute.
I was typing. I didn't want everybody to hear me. I think I hear you, and I'm not suggesting that the documentation be the source of record. I'm suggesting it is there to inform, and we would, as far as like defining what that behavior is, it could be part and like include the documentation that has this executable form as defining some possible new sets, and we can flag whether we want those included in the behaviors or not. But it helps with onboarding people to using Kubernetes, because now the documentation is more of an executable form. And as that's, if we just ran all of the executable documentation through a CI engine, we would have this possible list of behaviors to include with links back to where that behavior comes from a documentation perspective. It's not saying this is the definitive list. It's just saying here is a really well-informed, based on what we say Kubernetes is, definition of conformance.
Yeah, and I mean, if nothing else, like having documentation that has some validation, right, that runs through some automated process and shows that it actually works. So that, like you're saying, when onboarding, if you're going through an onboarding thing and your documentation is wrong, it's very frustrating. So this would be helpful in that regard. I'm not sure what it would take to get it there. I guess that's what you took a few of those documents and you were going to go through and try it out. How did that go?
We kind of developed some other tooling around it where we're working with someone else. So you're pairing together, and as you're going through the documentation, it actually creates a little session pointing at a cluster, and you just kind of hit go on the code blocks within the documentation, because we started with the markdown for the links you sent us, and then just kind of converted that into executable documentation. So it's exactly the same, except it says here's the code block you run, and it captures the output. And we didn't get quite to the point of let's start, before you start running everything, start the audit log capture, and then when we stop the audit log capture and bring that back in. So that's kind of our next step in that POC. But before we went too far, I just wanted to get some feedback from this group if we wanted to spend a little time bringing that, so there was this executable documentation that brought in audit logs, which allowed us to have some definition of conformance, and with the intention of that flowing into an ID, in the YAML file, like a possible, do we want this to merge into the defined set of complex behaviors that you're working on, John?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're going to go to that extent of modifying documentation, I think this is going to have, obviously this isn't the group that makes that decision, so we need to.
Sure.
Yeah, we have that proof of concept. I guess you've got something.
It's trying to get to a POC.
Yeah.
To see if it has value to us, and then if it has value to us, that's not. I mean, it's probably like a week or two more. But then taking that to SIG documentation and going, hey, we found this useful for us to help define what it is, but we don't want to be the people writing the documentation and creating these new behaviors. Is this useful for onboarding more people to the Kubernetes community and allowing them to walk through, and maybe the combination of cross-group ideas, eventually this becomes a way we define what it is we're doing here that's generated by us, instead of kind of we're guessing pretty hard. We're doing some really fun things, but I think it would be really cool to include everybody in trying to define what it is we're doing.
Any questions, comments, complaints, concerns there?
I don't know if there's a way to get like a consensus if anybody has any negative feedback to not go that way. Maybe I'll phrase it in that form.
I would prefer to see a concrete action item, like show it by example, right? Because we talked so abstractly,
yeah.
But actually show it in action,
right, so
right? Like as part of it.
We'll put it under API Snoop. It's not really API Snoop, but I'm going to add an AI here for example using Bell Amara. He gave us some links, and I'll create tickets. John's links. And this will go through and it will show DNS steps, extend documentation for DNS steps, and then executes steps, and then captures audit logs. And then I guess the last thing was just display the API Snoop graph of that for now. But more interesting would be there's lots of other interesting stuff we could do here to the same test, but we're just going to stop there.
Yeah.
Make documentation, generate an API Snoop graph.
And just as context for everybody, that the at least two of the three links, one was sort of a narrative documentation, right? It's like the regular documentation you read, and it goes through some examples and gives you some things. And then the other one was the same material, more or less, or a superset of the material, but in more of a reference format. So I thought that it would be interesting to see how the tooling that Hippie is working on works on those two different types of documentation.
So I'll add those links in real quick.
Anything else? Are there any last topics that folks want to discuss? Going once.
Just a mini question, because I kind of forgot about this. Would it be wise to send an email to the mailing list when we start to replace the images? Like, hey, we're gonna replace all the images with this one. So it might break you, so heads up.
I would definitely notify SIG testing ahead of time, because they will be the first to notice, as well as the release team. So you might want to, I would plan it very early in the 1.16 cycle, or at least give a PSA to the release team, testing, and maybe SIG architecture in general, just so that other people are aware.
Mm-hmm. Just the Slack channel is okay, or mailing list?
Mailing list, please.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks.
All right, round 3. Are there any last topics? Once. I'll go slow. Twice. You unmuted 3 times. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.